welcome to the Own Your Epic podcast. My name is Jay Dostal, author of the book Own Your Epic, Leadership Lessons in Owning Your Voice and Your Story. In this podcast, I highlight the stories and voices of educators across the country who are making a difference in schools and uncover what makes them exceptional leaders in their field. By sharing the voices and stories of others, we can all learn to appreciate that each of us is the author of our own epic and our experiences are relatable to others, if we are willing to share them. Let's get started on the Own Your Epic process. Welcome to the Own Your Epic podcast. This is Jay Dostal, and I am excited to have this next guest on the podcast because she's my sister, and we get to talk a lot about education at family events, but I thought she'd be a perfect opportunity. I thought this would be a perfect opportunity for her to share her voice and her story about her experiences in education. So why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
My name is Lynn, and this is my 23rd year teaching, and I have wore several different hats in my experience. I've been in the same district my entire career, but I started off as a student teacher in 4th grade, and then in middle school math, science, and social studies, and then accepted my first teaching job as a middle school math teacher. And after that, I transitioned into a role of the district technology team and was part of helping roll out laptops to students in kindergarten through 8th grade. The high school already had laptops, and I was a technology integration specialist. So I did that for a few years, and my latest role is working with our students in the area of gifted and talented education. I like to say just enrichment, because gifted and talented has some, I guess, connotations that go with it that may or may not be positive. So I just like to say I provide students with enrichment opportunities despite their test scores or despite whether or not they're labeled as gifted.
That's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up because I think that kids and adults are gifted in a variety of ways. In fact, if you and I were to talk to our mom, she would tell us that we're gifted in certain ways where we don't necessarily think they're gifts, but they are what they are.
Yes, and in the gifted world, we have lots of ways to identify students' abilities, but most of the time it boils down to a test that identifies a reading or a literature talent or a math talent, a science talent, and what's overlooked a lot of times are just, talents with social emotional skills and talents with arts and talents with, music and service. There's so many things we can't measure on a test. So I'm really proud of the work that the team that I work on has done over the last couple of years to kind of gray those areas of labels when it comes to gifted and talented.
That's so cool. I want to circle back to something you had mentioned when you first started. So one of the ongoing conversations that I've had on this podcast is, talking with people who have been at various different levels. And, my story is I've always been in high school, so I've never been anywhere else than high school. And I've been in multiple districts, whereas you have been in the same district your entire career and primarily at the middle level. And so was middle level education something you were always, is that where you were geared towards, and why so?
My 2 undergrad degrees are in elementary education and then middle school education. And it was one of my classes in Kearney where I took a middle school methods class at one of the middle schools there with a principal at the middle school teaching the class. And that's where my heart really opened to the idea of teaching middle school, because that's where I did learn to have a love for math. I had some great middle school math teachers, and so that's when I decided that I wanted to teach middle school versus elementary. But I will say that the elementary methods classes that I had in that degree really helped me more than anything, because that's what methods courses do for you in elementary is they teach you how to teach. And so I wasn't a content master in math or science or social studies, but I learned some really important ways to teach those concepts to students.
It's so interesting that you say that because I have conversations with high school teachers all the time um, about how kids don't begin to hate school as they go to high school. It's the type of instruction and the type of engagement and the type of involvement that they have in their education where at the elementary level they are all over the place and they have this zest and this excitement for learning, and then obviously you get to the middle age years and hormones come into place, but they're still relatively excited, and then they get to high school and all of a sudden you start seeing that flame extinguish. And so and I'm sure you see that with your own boys as they're growing up. I know I've seen it a little bit with my kids, but again, I go back to and tell high school teachers a lot that we have a lot to learn from our elementary counterparts because those kids are on fire in elementary, and if we can just capture just a little bit of that magic at the high school level, there's a lot of things that could happen.
Yeah, my eyes were completely opened when I took my middle school role and transitioned into the district technology role. And right away, looking at these elementary teachers, I was blown away. They work their tails off. They work all day long with the same kids all day long, so they don't have the luxury of saying bye after 40 minutes, and just some of the most passionate teachers at that level, and love what they do, and like you said, light fires for kids to take off in so many different directions. And the kids have this level of confidence, and then they come up and I saw it in middle school. They thought that they were bad at math. It's like, why do you think that? Well, let's say they didn't have their math facts on time in fourth grade. They couldn't get their division facts in a certain amount of time. And I'm looking back now, and even how I teach now, it's like, you know what? Some of these things that I used to teach as a middle school math teacher as being so, so important, and I you know made such a big deal about, really are not. And it's just how you frame things as a teacher, and the importance of certain skills that I thought were so important back then. They're still important, but just the confidence level of kids. And I mean, you can see it in adults. I ask adults all the time, or they tell me all the time, I hate math. Why do you hate math? Oh, in high school I had this teacher, or in college I had this, it's never an elementary teacher that turned them off to math. It's usually a middle school or high school teacher when it got, harder, and they didn't maybe know how to teach it
It's so inter-
to a different learner.
yeah, it's so interesting you bring that up because your area is math and science. My area is in English, and I mean I love the English side of things. And I have said on multiple occasions that I wasn't the greatest math student. I can still do it. It's just not a passion of mine. And I know whenever I engage in those conversations with math people in particular, they it's like a burr in their saddle right now. Like everybody can do math,
Yeah.
and every single one of the teachers I talk to would say, I want to go back into that person's life and find out where math ended up getting this negative perception in this individual kid's mind. And more times than not, as you said, it's at that middle and high school level where it gets really hard. And going back to something you said before, it's not apples to apples when we start talking about elementary to middle or even middle to high school. High school folks have 150 kids, and they have the content is much more difficult, and so it really does no good for a comparison because everybody is filling a role that they have in the organization, and they're doing their part. I just think that a lot of people get frustrated and stressed and have a lot of anxiety when they start doing the comparison with one another.
Well, and I'll be the first to say that as a middle school teacher, I did that finger pointing like, what are you elementary teachers doing? They're coming into middle school and they don't know this, that, or the other. And then I went to the elementary level and they were absolutely teaching those things. It was just that I was giving them permission to forget as a middle school teacher. And I think even high school too, they like to point the fingers down to the next level. And it's just a matter of someone else speaking and teaching the concept, maybe using a different language, and just owning that, yeah, it might be different, but I'm not going to give you permission to forget because now I know you had this in fourth grade. You just need to have a little refresher. But I think all too often we, or I should say I let the kids forget, and I trusted them, and then I made them go through the motions and learn it again. Like somehow I was going to teach it better and they would learn it. And in reality, I look back now and I think I turned a lot more kids off during my middle school math teaching years because I neglected what they probably already knew from elementary. They just needed a little bit of a different outlook on it, and I shouldn't have. Anyway, lots of things I could change, but seeing the bigger picture, being at different levels, whether that's in the same building, same district, whatever. But you find out kids are kids no matter
Yeah.
where you go. And the content, looks a little bit different in how you teach it. So I just really appreciate having to have that lens of all the grade levels.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because in a recent conversation with Melanie, my wife, uh, we were talking about the exact same thing. She's actually, when she was teaching the young adult transition program, 18 to 21, it was actually taking place right across the hall from the pre-K room.
Oh,
And so she's actually had the experiences of pre-K through 21, and now she's all just waiting for the birth of three to see how that works.
right.
But something else you mentioned too that I think it's like one of my favorite teacherisms, and we all have them, but sometimes we don't recognize our own. But I'm going to steal this one from Mom because Mom gave me the greatest teacherism, and I use it all the time. And I hate the fact that I have to give her credit for it because I know that she would get a big head about it. But uh, she said, "Don't point a finger at somebody else because when you do, you're going to have three pointing right back at you." And so when you start doing that, you almost have to reflect on your own faults and your own mistakes, and that's how you grow and get better. And so the fact that you're willing to be vulnerable enough to share that, hey, I messed up, is really powerful because I know that you're going to use that to improve in the future. So, um, who's been the biggest influence on you?
Probably mom and dad. I've always shared that they taught me more about being humble and just the ways to make relationships with people. I've, like I said, told this story. I remember going with mom to Edison Elementary, and we'd always go through the janitor's room and talk with the janitors for a little bit, and then we'd go make our way to the main office and talk with the secretary and the whoever was there. We didn't go straight to her room to start working. We made time to make relationships and talk with people. And I remember going to games with dad and going, up to school with him, and we'd always make time to talk with everyone. And it just the way they led by example, as far as really encouraging or supporting all aspects of what makes the school go round. That was pivotal, I think, in my development. That my job isn't any better than anyone else's, and you need these other people to make your job easier. So make sure you stop by and talk with them and not just demand things need to be done. And when you make those relationships, it just goes a lot easier in so many ways.
It's so cool that you and I have that shared experience because I remember that specifically with Dad when I would go to games with him,
Mm-hmm.
and we would stop in the custodial break room, and inevitably there was going to be food there, and we would talk with the secretaries and all of that. And I remember Dad, and I was just a little person, so it's not like this had this at the moment. It didn't feel like it was this sage knowledge, but it has proven to be over time. And he told me that, listen, without those people, this place doesn't run. I've got my role in the classroom and I do what I need to do, but if we don't have custodians, if we don't have secretaries, if we don't have these people doing their jobs, this place doesn't run. And it was only years later when I actually got into education, my first teaching job, I modeled what he taught me, and I introduced myself to the custodians and went around and met all the secretaries because, again, I knew that they were going to be pivotal for me being successful as well. And I translate that into my job now as a principal, that everybody serves a role in the organization. They know what they have to do, and without them, we can't do school the way that we want. And so that's why it's important to honor everybody and share everybody's voice in this. In fact, one of the upcoming podcasts that I'm going to have is actually with my secretary at work right now, because when I asked her, she said, "No, I'm not a teacher." I said, "You're a teacher because you work in this building.
Mm-hmm.
You're a valuable member of the staff, and you have a voice in your story, and people need to hear
Mm-hmm.
that." And so it's so cool that you and I have that shared experience. And I agree, mom and dad did a phenomenal job of ingraining that in all of us.
Yes, I agree.
Um, so two important parts of the Own Your Epic process are to cultivate and curate your stories. And when you do those, you're able to amplify your own voice and your own story. Do you have a particular story that comes to mind to you all the time about, that you want to tell people about your process of getting into education or your pathway into education? And if you do, what is that?
You say it again. Sorry.
It's all right. I'm going to pause it right here real quick. So, when part of the Own Your Epic process is to curate and cultivate your stories, not saying that everything has to be told and not saying that you're an open book about everything, but selecting those particular stories that really have shaped you as an individual. By doing so, you can amplify your own voice, your own story, and you can be relatable to others because they can share the experience with you. And so, do you have one of those stories that really resonates with you, that has kind of shaped you, that maybe others can resonate with?
I don't know how many years I had been teaching, but I was still at the middle school, so maybe uh, 3 years. It was before I had kids, because I remember it was after school, and my friend Sarah Cranky and I were just sitting around after school talking about the day. And she and I were talking about this one particular student and how the student's mother was kind of annoying us because she was constantly emailing about grades, and one of those where we got an email before the grades were even, or the minute the grades were entered type of thing. And so, I mean, I looking back now, I can't even tell you what the conversation was, but being a pretty new teacher, I can tell you we weren't like saying anything terrible. We were just voicing our frustrations or just, having the end of the day conversation in our office. Well, what we forgot to remember was that that student was outside of our office retaking a test, but we both didn't think anything of it because we're like, well, yeah, he's outside, the door was closed. Anyway, the next morning, we both get called to the principal's office, and there was the mother, and we got called out on talking about her, and he overheard us, and we never knew what he heard. And we both were, really new teachers, and we were scared to death that we were going to lose our jobs. I mean, probably irrational thought at that point, but what's also funny is Sarah and I have a birthday. It's a day apart. So this was May 17th. It's her birthday. My birthday was the day before. We both get called to the principal's office, third year teaching. And
Had you ever been called to the principal's office,
no,
even as a student? I
not
didn't think
even as a
so.
student. But I felt absolutely terrible. And I do remember the mother saying, neither one of you have kids. How can you even like empathize with me? And I look back and I think, yeah, now that I do have my own kids, I'm a completely different teacher. And I do think about when I'm talking about my frustrations. I'm not one that goes to the teacher's lounge and, complains about things. And I pretty much keep to myself. And when I do have frustrations, I try to, do that with a trusted adult. But yeah, that was a pretty big moment that Sarah and I still talk about today that, we felt bad. And, maybe a part of it's because we really didn't know what we said that was so bad. But we got called out, and the principal was there, the mother was there. And, from then on, we were very careful about what we said and where we said it.
That's an amazing learning experience, though. I mean, obviously, you hate going through that process, and you hate the fact that a kid overheard you talking about a parent, and you hate the fact that you know, you're taking it from the parent, and rightly so, but you failed forward.
Yeah.
That was a failure, but you failed forward, and I know that you improved on that in the future, and so you're very cognizant about what's being said. And I think that is, one of the really important parts of um, your story. It's certainly part of mine that, we are fallible human beings. We make mistakes all the time. The question is whether or not you can own up to it and learn from it and move forward. And, that's a perfect example of you doing that. So, I want to ask you something else regarding, you're talking about new teacher. You were a new teacher when that happened. You've been in the classroom now for 20 some odd years, and you've seen a lot. You've been around a lot of other teachers. This is not exactly the greatest time in the world to be a teacher trying to teach in a pandemic and doing all these different things. Social emotional health is and well-being is at an all-time low for teachers because they don't necessarily know what outlets they're going to follow or to utilize. What's your best advice on social emotional well-being? Like, how do you separate yourself from Lynn the person versus Lynn the educator? How do you take care of yourself?
How do I take care of myself?
Yeah.
Oh, I try not to base my identity on any one role that I have. And in a time where we are flooded with identity opportunities, I know as a 46-year-old, I'm overwhelmed by some of the labels that are out there. And I sometimes worry about kids having too many choices too young. And I can see both sides of it because I can see where putting a label on something gives you identity and gives you a purpose. But I also know that really knowing who you are and what your identity is what helps me stay focused. So I'm a mother, I'm a sister, a daughter, and I really take those two roles as being, my top priority. And I am an educator, but that's not my number one identity, like it probably used to be when I was first starting as a teacher. Um, and so I found peace at limiting my labels of being, all these things and just saying, you know what, I'm a person and you know, I fail and I make mistakes and I'm not the best at what I do, but I'm real. I'm living the life of a lot of mothers and people in this pandemic. So I think I'm relatable because I'm real about who I am and that I don't have all the answers.
Well, it's so interesting that you talked about the different hats and the different roles that you have because as you were speaking, it really resonated with me, and I think you know this about me. I'm a very driven person, and I have a really tough time setting boundaries and expectations on my own time. And I think that's one of the things that, and if you were to talk with Melanie or my kids, they might say that I'm highly invested in my job as a building principal because I want to be a servant leader to the people that I am charged to lead. And that means that I want to make sure that if they need resources or support, or if they have questions, that I'm always there. And if the pandemic has really taught me anything, it's taught me to maybe reanalyze and reshuffle some of those priorities. That it's all right to take care of your own mental health and well-being, and it's all right if you don't answer that email right now. It's all right if you don't get that done. You can slow down and you can still accomplish a lot, but it's just it's rewiring your brain for that. And so and again, putting the priorities back into perspective, that teacher is just one part of the hat that you wear, much like principal is just one part of the hat that I wear. But I think that it's sometimes difficult for teachers in particular, educators in particular, who in most cases were really good at school, and they're high achievers themselves, and they feel like if they don't excel at this, that they're going to be letting themselves down or their students down, when in fact that is totally not the case, because they're professionals and they're going to do their job. It's all right to take care of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
because if you don't fill up your own bucket, you certainly can't fill up others when you're empty. So
True.
um, one of the last questions that I have as part of this podcast is a question that I think is really really important, that I ask all guests this, because again, we are in a very difficult time in education, where we have a lot of people who are leaving the profession, and there really isn't exactly a pipeline behind them of people wanting to come into the profession. And so I've made it a point to ask all of my guests, what advice do they have? Two sets of advice. What do you have for advice for those who are veteran teachers who are really just thinking about hanging it up? And, what do you have to say to them to stay in the profession, because you've done it for over 20 years, compared to what advice do you have for those who are maybe thinking about getting into the profession, and what would you tell them to say, hey, be prepared for this? And I know you're not going to be making a lot of money, but what advice do you have?
I've had a couple of opportunities to answer this question, and the first one is that I'm have been able to teach a master's level course for people who have a degree in something other than education, and they come back to a master's degree program and get their teaching degree and their master's degree in the same year. But these people are adults and have a biology degree or an art major or a degree in anything. And then now they're coming into teaching because they see how rewarding it can be to share their passion with students. And so that's been fun to be able to teach that class and see education through the eyes of someone who didn't go into it right out of the gate like I did. Like I only ever knew education, so that was what I was going to be. But these students, non traditional, if you will, are coming to education with I think, the right heart and mindset of saying, okay, yeah, I know my stuff, but what am I going to do with it? And so they're usually pretty excited and want to be there and are excited to get into education for that reason. So, as far as me not getting burnout or me staying the course, I've had an opportunity to work with our Chamber of Commerce and other local businesses who have partnered with public education to do like internships in the summer. So I spent a couple of weeks at Hot Shops, which is a art gallery downtown. I spent a couple of weeks at a industry Novozymes in Blair, Nebraska one summer, and I got paid for it. But I got to see life outside of education because, again, that's all I've ever known. And the whole point of connecting teachers with those businesses was that the teachers could then go back to their classroom and have experience to say, hey, this is why you need to know this, or this is where this could play out, or did you even know this job existed? Like you could have this job. Those are all things for me I didn't know existed. And so I spent several summers, doing those internships just to see what else was out there. And, maybe the time will come where I leave education and I go try something else. But for right now, those kinds of opportunities just kind of recharge me. And I know a lot of teachers just need the summer to wind down and not think about things. But I have found those experiences have helped me stay the course and find a little bit of a excitement back into my teaching practices, because now I see, oh, I watched this person working and they were using these ratios every single day, or this person was, uh, doing this, that, or the other. And I could make those connections and I could tell my students about those things because I saw it in action.
What advice do you have for the newbies coming into the profession?
Oh, wow. I would say if there's anything you can do, like I remember being a sophomore in college and thinking, I have no business being in the classroom, or I don't know what I'm getting into. And so I got a job as a sophomore as a para in Kearney at a middle school. And I think that those years in college being a para, that's my advice would be, is while you're in school to be a teacher, I know that they require a lot more hours in the schools now compared to when I was in school. But I would say as much as you can be around kids during that time to make sure this is really what you want, because it is different actually being a teacher than, just getting up there and knowing your content. Because you could love math, you could love art all you want, but being a teacher is not just about knowing your content.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than finishing your degree, spending all that money on a degree, and then finding out that you really don't want to be around kids.
Yeah. Well, and even some of my students that I had in that master's class, I think, some of the perceptions are, well, I have a degree in this, I can just go teach. No, you can't just go teach. You need to know so much more than your content level, and now more than ever. I maybe back in the day you could do 90% teaching and 10%, behavior, whatever, but it's a really fine line between relationship building and behavior management and teaching your content. I mean, there's so many more aspects of the profession than just knowing your content.
Right, Lynn. So I said that last question was the last question, but I have one more for you before we end here. And I'm not going to ask this question to any other guests other than my sisters. This is your one opportunity on a public podcast to share some dirt on your brother. Like what's the one story about your brother that you feel like needs to be told?
Wow.
We got to keep it clean too, though, because I
Keep it
don't.
clean. you know, didn't know at the time of growing up anything different than having three girls and a boy in a family. I don't remember any specific things. I do remember some things, I guess, but now having four boys of my own, I can definitely say that I have four J's. I am raising four J's, and that gives me hope because you turned out okay. They're going to turn out okay. But when it comes to some of the things I think about growing up with you, it's the same thing that I have as far as being strong willed, being a workaholic at times, being, I don't know, just so many things that independent. And that's the way mom and dad raised us. So the things that I can point out about you are the same things that I possess in the same degree, not the same degree. Like I feel like your, assertiveness and your strong will and independence shine more, but I know as a kid, I see that in my own boys, and I am so frustrated because they just are never wrong and they always have a comeback and they always, want to challenge everything. But so I guess I really am not answering your question. I'm not having any dirt on you. I'm just saying that the skills that mom and dad raised us with have proven to be, good skills, because I think all four of us are in successful jobs, and uh, almost to a fault where we can't ask for help sometimes and we don't know how to delegate because we were raised to do things ourselves and do it the right way and work hard. So, yeah, I don't know. Does that answer your question?
It did, and it kind of led into my closing here that, the fact that you and I are sitting down and having a 30-minute conversation about education after our childhood, where you and I did not get along, of all four of the kids in the Dostal family, you and I fought like they were awful fights. And, I'm sure that there were plenty of times we said some things to each other that were not very helpful, also really hurtful.
Mm-hmm.
But I look at it now, and you and I have a great relationship. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, we are in the same type of profession. We have very similar family values, and we raise our kids in very similar ways. And, I like to end almost every podcast with an affirmation. And I need to tell you that I think you're a phenomenal teacher. I know that because I see how kids respond to your former students. I've actually seen it happen. But I also think you're a tremendous mother. And yes, you are raising four J's, and they are very strong willed young men themselves, but they are going to be excellent at whatever they do because they have a mother who models it on a daily basis. And so I applaud you for
Thank
that.
you.
So that is the end of this Own Your Epic podcast. Thank you, Lynn, for being a guest. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We will see you next time on the Own Your Epic podcast.
Thank you for joining me on today's podcast. To find out more about Own Your Epic, check out my website at ownyourepic.blogspot.com, where you can purchase my book or subscribe to all the latest blog and podcast updates. Until next time, own your epic and share your voice and your story. It matters and can make a difference in the lives of others.